Mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Andy Rogers, and I'll be your host tonight. And we're joined by our special guest, all the way from the States, Dr. Wade Gilbert. Before I ask Wade to introduce himself a little bit more formally, I guess just to acknowledge the situation that we're in. It's traditionally we'd be moving from winter sport in New Zealand, Wade, into summer sport. Like most of the world, we've been hit another blow with the Delta variant, so it's thrown things into a bit of a spin for us. And I guess as we think about tonight's workshop, it's probably become even more critical to look at our role and our impact as a coach and the young people that are moving back into sport and the situations that they've been in, the lack of contact, the lack of autonomy, the sense of belongingness that they're missing out on. So probably a really good point just to stop and acknowledge, our role and impact we can have as young people start to move back into sport. Before we get the workshop underway officially, I'd just like to settle things and get us prepared using our Sport New Zealand karakia. If I can do that now. Tu taua mai runga, tu taua mai aranga, tu taua mai roto, tu taua mai waho, kia tau ai ti Māori tū, kia tau ai ti Māori ora, tūturu whakamaua kia tina, humie, huie, taikie. Thank you. So Balance is Better is a workshop series that we've been running. This is the fourth and penultimate in our series. We have one more next week targeting successful parenting. So make sure you tune in for that one as well. It promises to be an outstanding session. So tonight really is about coaching and your impact as a coach, and just looking to unpack this concept of balance is better. So many of you across the country have hopefully heard of the Balance is Better philosophy. It's a national philosophy, really looking to bring the spotlight onto quality experiences for all young people, regardless of their abilities, their needs, and their motivations. And it's very much about keeping young people, or giving them a love for sport, so getting them involved, and then keeping them involved and helping them fulfill their potential at the right time, whatever that potential may be. Some will go on to elite level, most will stay, and we hope stay for a long time at a competitive level. So Balance is Better as a philosophy, and some may ask, what does that actually mean? We've come up with a series of 9 principles, essentially, that cover off what balance is better means to us. And I won't go into the principles tonight, but as a coach or a parent or administrator, it'd be great for you to unpack those a little bit more. And we've got a load of information on our website, and we've got the website down the bottom there for you to jump on and have a look. So tonight is very much about, while we won't go into the principles in essence, tonight is very much about Wade sharing some experiences of how we as coaches can bring balance is better to life. Little bit of logistics for the webinar tonight. Be great if we can, as you're throwing your names up there, also get some sports and where you're from. So the chat function is the function we'll use also for questions. So it'd be great to get to know you a little bit more. So if you can pop your name, your sport, even your country, and just share that in the chat box, and also throw any questions that you have throughout the event into the chat box, and we'll look to address them and have a chat to Wade about those as we go through. We'll be running a couple of polls. The first one should be up about now, and it's just to help us get to know you a little bit better and who you are. And it looks like so far, Wade, most of the group are coaches. So we're talking to the right group, but also great to see some parents in there and some administrators as well. So welcome everyone. The second poll we're going to put up is to actually ask you what age group you might be coaching. So to give us a feel of how we can position this. So the second poll is up there now, and looks like we've got a good proportion of coaches working with teenagers. So again, that's good positioning for the session tonight as well, Wade. We'll be also adding some resources through the session, and you'll find them in the files document. You've got some tabs on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see some information that Wade's happily shared with us that will pop in there for you as well. If you have any issues with technology, best thing is just to log off and log back in on the same same email login that you were sent. And if you have any issues whatsoever getting back in, Hamish, our administrators in the background working away, please email that email that's on that on there, and he'll make sure you get back in. So let's crack into it. Really excited about tonight's guest. He's a good friend of New Zealand. I was looking back in the history, Wade, and I think you visited here for the first time, or maybe even earlier than that, around about 2015 for a big coaching convention we had here. And you've visited a few more times, but it's a real delight to welcome you in to the chat tonight.
No, thank you, Andy. It's an honor to be here and have an opportunity to connect and share with all the wonderful people who are joining us tonight. And yes, I would love to be there in person again. And as soon as we can fly and travel and do that more regularly, I definitely will be back.
Awesome. Now, Wade, tonight we're looking to chat. Probably, if I broke the session down, we're going to look at coaches' role, their impact that coaches have on participants and athletes. You're going to provide a bit of a framework coaches could look at in terms of, what does success look like from a coaching perspective? And I think throughout the chat, we're going to maybe share some tools that you've found pretty useful over your time as well. The great thing I like about you, Wade, is that not only are you an amazing researcher with your finger on the pulse, you're also a practitioner through the work you do with teams, and you coach yourself as well. So let's get to know Wade Gilbert a little bit more.
Well, thank you, Andy. Yeah, I think the first time I heard the term pracademic was when I was doing a speaking tour in New Zealand, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "You know what you are? You're a pracademic." And I had no idea. I'd never heard that before. I said, "Well, what does that mean?" Someone who could take academic work and make it practical. And I said, "Well, thanks. I'll take that as a compliment." But I think what we're going to try and do here tonight is just share a few quick examples, evidence-based examples, and principles. So why these types of strategies can work, and then also these can serve as maybe a catalyst for you to adapt or revise things that you're already doing. So in terms of my background, I'm born and raised in Canada. Worked in the United States for the last 20 years. Been very, very, very lucky and fortunate to have worked in dozens of countries around the world doing workshops, and what that's allowed me to do is see the commonality that we all share, whether we're coaching in Singapore or Finland or New Zealand or South Africa or Canada or wherever. There's some very common, and regardless of the sport that we coach, there's some very common principles that we can use to help guide us in our efforts to become better coaches. And then in addition to, I work at a university as a professor, so I'm constantly working with students and coaches there and teaching and doing research. But I also coach, and I've coached ice hockey and softball and baseball and track and field and soccer. And so I'm actually coaching right now. I'm coaching my 14-year-old son's ice hockey team, and both my kids play water polo. That's another sport, and tennis. So, and I was a multi-sport athlete growing up. So I've basically been involved in sport my whole life.
Awesome. And you've had a pretty cool experience just recently with a team to the Olympics.
Yes, that was a phenomenal opportunity that I had to jump on when I was doing some work with Team Canada with their softball coaching staff, and softball and baseball were added to the Olympics for Tokyo 2020, brought back into the Olympics, and the coach asked if I would formally join the staff as their mental performance coach. And it provided me with an opportunity to spend 2 years traveling around the world with the team and working at the Olympics and through the Olympics and making history with that team and bringing home the first medal that program had ever won in the Olympics.
Awesome. Well done. Well done. There was actually another significant medal of the Canadian team that we recognised over here, a coach that had, I guess, was grounded in New Zealand through our football system, went on to win the gold with the Canadian women's team as well. So I'll be talking about Bev Priestman there. So a number of the people on the call probably recall Bev and may still be in contact with her. But we've got important fish to fry tonight in terms of this webinar. Most of our coaches on tonight are working at a community level. And I guess if I set the scene here, Wade, we've been in a bit of a messy period up and down the country. A big part of New Zealand right now, Auckland's still sort of in lockdown, as we say it, no sport. We've been in there 7 weeks. We're just starting to introduce our young people back into sports. So important topic to discuss tonight.
Definitely, this is an opportunity for us to. It's almost like a redo or a fresh opportunity. I know from speaking with coaches around the world the last few years, the forced pause has given us an opportunity to get better and have some time and some space to maybe reach out to people we've always wanted to connect with, or read that book that's been sitting on our desk for the last 4 years, and kind of catch up, watch videos, things like that. And then also, come back hopefully with renewed energy and enthusiasm for connecting again with our kids.
Awesome. Should we crack into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Impact of great coaching.
Let's do it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead here and keep us moving then. So the way that we're going to try this for everyone out there who's listening is I'll present a key theme or principle, maybe a strategy, then we'll pause and Andy and I'll have a little chat about it and try and connect it to maybe some of the things that might be directly relevant to you or particular things that are happening in New Zealand. So whenever I'm asked to do a session or a workshop, I always like to start with a quick introduction to good coaching, because we often want to get better, right? The effort that you're making tonight is in the interest of getting better. But before we work on trying to get better, we have to agree on what better is. What does better look like? And so the essence of a lot of the work that I've done is around this one question, what does good coaching look like? What should it look like? What could it look like? And last year, I think it was last year or the year before, the Los Angeles Dodgers professional American baseball team here won their championship, their World Series. And the head coach was his first job as a professional head coach. And I was reading an interview with him shortly after they won. And he said that one of the things he did when he got hired, before he met with the team, is he went out and as quickly as he could, he connected with other coaches in other sports, asking them for advice. I'm taking over this team. What are some tips that you could give me in terms of building a great team and connecting with people? And he said, after having those conversations, there were 3 things that really stood out that came across all these conversations. And he said, essentially, good coaching to me is being able to do these 3 things. Your players, number one, understanding that good coaches understand that they're in the service of their athletes. Sport was never created for coaches. It was created for athletes. Coaches play a critical role, but it's about the athletes. It's not about us. So the service orientation is very important. With that in mind, generally players want to know 3 things about their coach. Does my coach care about me? Can I trust my coach? And can my coach make me better? And the more I've been around all levels of sport, all different sports, all over the world, I think that we could stop the session here tonight and this would capture the essence of great coaching. If you do nothing else or think about nothing else after tonight's session other than these 3 bullet points, go back out with your team and keep these things, maybe write them down and keep them very present for you. Are the things I'm doing here this week, this session, showing my athletes that I care about them, that they can trust me, and that I can help them get better. And when you do that, you end up having a much better experience. The athletes have a better experience, and success. I can't say you're going to win more necessarily, right? But you're going to be putting your athletes in a position to have more success. And I've seen this same kind of theme pop up with lots of different coaches. And you'll see I'm going to use examples from different sports tonight, different countries, and obviously a lot of my work is in North America, so you'll see a lot from that. And all these things, the examples I'm sharing with you, the reason I pick these examples is because they can apply to any sport, any level, honestly, anywhere in the world. So don't get hung up on the example. Think about the principle and the concept. So reinforcing this idea of what is good coaching, another way you could think about it is you coach people first and sports second. And the example I have here is a woman named Jill Ellis. She is the only person to have coached two soccer, football teams to 2 World Cups, the U.S. women's soccer team. And she was also a college coach, a successful college coach before she took over the national team. And I was doing a workshop one time with her in the workshop, and we talked a little bit after, and she shared this idea that, yes, to really have success and connect with athletes and with your teams, you have to go in with the mindset that you're coaching people who happen to play a sport. So this is more than semantics. This is a way of being. So when someone asks you, what do you coach? Say, I coach cricket. No. You coach people who happen to play cricket. You're not a tennis coach. You're a people coach, a coach of people who happen to play tennis. And when we think about it that way, it constantly reinforces and helps us remember the human element, right? I'm coaching people how to serve, how to bowl, how to pitch, how to catch. So I'm not teaching techniques and tactics and strategies. I'm teaching people how to do these things. And to me, that's the essence of what we might refer to as athlete-centered coaching. And this is a term you may have seen in your experiences, and it gets used quite a lot in my experience around the world. People talk about athlete-centered coaching. What does that mean? It means coach people first, sports second. And that applies whether you're working at the highest levels. This is, coming out of the Tokyo Olympics and with a team that won a medal there, or whether I'm coaching here in my local city, kids, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids. It's the same principle. You coach people first, sports second. So what we're going to do in the rest of the session, and we'll pause here in a moment, is I'm going to share with you a principle and a strategy or two for each of what we call the 4 C's. So if I want to create better people through sport and better athletes, these should be the targets. These are our targets. We give targets to our athletes. We set goals and targets for them. But as a coach, how do I know if I'm living up to those standards of coaching people first, sports second, developing better athletes? These are the outcomes. We call them the 4 C's, and there's lots of literature behind this. But there's competence, confidence, connection, and character. So competence would be better athlete, right? Better skilled, more fit. So that's kind of where most of us think when we think about coaching. I'm coaching someone to be faster, stronger, better athlete. Confidence in my mind would be equivalent to resilience or grit or mental toughness. So it's more than feeling good about yourself. It's believing in your ability to come back and try it again after a tough practice, a tough loss, a tough, event. So we want people, hardiness, right? We want people to, and that's a really important attribute to build through sport. The connection component or outcome would be interpersonal skills. So better teammate, being able to have conversations, meaningful conversations with coaches and officials and administrators. So the interpersonal component, and then the character would be integrity, our core values, our team culture, things like that, how we contribute to that. Andy, how do you
Yeah,
see
Wade, let's pause you there for a minute.
Yeah.
I think we're going to throw up our next poll.
Yeah.
Or a couple of polls. We're going to ask people just to rank, I think, which one that they feel they're most confident in delivering in their coaching. So that poll is going to go up shortly, everyone. And then we're going to ask you, I think the second question is going to be, what would you like to know more? What would you like to do better out of the 4 Cs? While that's going on, Wade, I'd be quite keen to pick up on this point. It was a brilliant quote from you around sport wasn't designed for coaches. That the coach's role is to serve. I'd like to unpack that just a little bit with you. Great quote. What does that mean in essence?
Well,
and what gets in the way? What gets in the way of coaches serving?
Ego, prestige, recognition, all the things we all deal with and struggle with at some point or another. But you see, I also think of humility. The greatest coaches that I've been around, whether it's little kids or pro teams, they're very humble, and they understand that they're there to serve their athletes. And I remember one of my favorite maxims from a great coach, Coach John Wooden, former basketball coach here in the United States, widely regarded as one of the best coaches of all time. He had a saying: they haven't you haven't taught until they've learned.
Yeah.
And it was always, and there's actually a book by that title, You Haven't Taught Until They've Learned. And it's that idea that, how often are you in a conversation with a coach? They come back from a tough practice or a tough loss. They say, those kids, man, the kids just aren't listening. The kids aren't playing hard. The effort is awful. The kids just don't get it. It's like literally you're pointing, it's them, right? And I was having this conversation with some coaches in Australia once, and somebody in the room said, you know what, that reminds me, every time you point the finger at somebody, there's, 3 more pointing back at you. Like it's on you. If they can't do it, you haven't taught it. And yes, there's going to be moments and effort issues and things like that, but it's a good reminder that if they're struggling or they can't execute something or they can't figure it out, my first thought should be, how can I teach it better? How can I communicate it better? So it should come back to me. Every time you're pointing the finger, instead of pointing the finger, point the thumb. Like it's on me, right? I should be thinking about how I can adapt, get better, learn to connect with these people.
Nice. Some really interesting, points there you raised around ego, humbleness, teaching and communicating, and often these are the skills that don't front up in a lot of the traditional coach education programs, but critical skills to coaching.
Yeah, these are some of the things we're going to look at a little bit tonight in the webinar. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. And it's very interesting to me looking at the poll here.
Isn't it? Yeah, so that's a good mix. And it was good to see the first poll that most people were more confident in the connection. So it was great to hear that, because that's an important part of coaching, that connection piece. But there's a good split here, Wade, across the 4 Cs. So perhaps we could jump in and have a look at each of them in their merit and how coaches can bring them to life a little bit more.
Yeah, no, this is great. We almost have a completely equal spread here, but okay. So what we're going to do then, this could be like when I was in New Zealand, we would do a 6-hour workshop around, these things. So we're going to just give you a sneak peek. And for some of you who've seen this before, versions of it, hopefully be a refresher or maybe stimulate you to go a little deeper on your own. So we'll look at, we'll go through each one at a time, and then we'll have a little dialogue, and then we'll keep moving. So with competence, again, we're thinking athletic skills, physical skills, tactical skills, things like that, better athlete, right? And when we look at competence, to me, this gets to the root of coaching. Coaching is teaching. And I didn't come into coaching, especially having come from an athlete to being a coach, thinking like a teacher or thinking of coaching as teaching. But a few years back, I was being interviewed, and the person asked me, they said, well, you know what the word coach means, right? And I said, yeah, someone who coaches. I never really thought about it. I said, no, like the root of the word. What does that mean? Where did that word come from? And you could look this up. There's information about this online, but the word, one of the main origins of the word is from the tutors who traveled in these horse and buggies, or these carriages, hundreds of years ago, teaching children while they were on these long journeys. Aristocrats, let's say, traveling across Europe with their kids in these carriages, and they would have a tutor. The tutor would be teaching the kids on these trips, and over time, these tutors simply became known as coaches because they traveled in the coach teaching the kids. And so I thought, okay, well, that's interesting to understand the root of the word. But then when we look at what we know about the science of great coaching, are great coaches really focused on teaching? Do they act like teachers? Do they understand pedagogy and teaching and learning and principles? And sure enough, they do. The better ones do. They invest heavily in learning how to become a better teacher. So it's not enough to know basketball or cricket. You have to know how to teach it. That's what your job is as a coach, your primary job. And the very first study, so one of the things I did early in my career was try and get a sense of what do we already know. And Coach Wooden also famously once said, the problem with new books is it keeps us from reading old books. Chances are the information's out there if you want to go look for it. So I looked at all the research that was published in English language research in coaching to see what do we really know about this thing called coaching. And all of it could be traced back to one study that was done, arguably the very first study ever on coaching science, in 1974, published in 1976, a study on John Wooden, the basketball coach. And it was the last year of his career, and it was also the year that resulted in the 10th championship that he won with his team. And so it was the last chance to study him. And what they did is they just went to the practices in the gyms in Los Angeles, and they just watched him. They never talked to him. It was two psychologists, and they just watched him. And I've been kept very close with one of these psychologists. He's still alive today. And they just watched him, and they just did a behavior analysis. What does this great coach do in training? What does he look like? And they published it in a magazine, a 2-page article in Psychology Today. You could still look it up. And it was just, this was the results section. It was just a table. And I highlighted here at the top the primary finding. So imagine if someone watched you for an entire season and practices and coded or recorded everything you said and did. And with John Wooden, as our very first coaching study and arguably one of the best coaches of all time, over 50% of everything he said or did was directly related to teaching, was instruction. But then if you factor in modeling and re-instruction, now we're getting up over 60%. So when you look at a portrait of one of our great coaches of all time, it clearly shows he was first and foremost a teacher, and he acted and thought like a teacher. And there's other studies with him explaining why he did it that way. And so when I was asked to write a book about coaching a few years back, I wanted to make sure I had a chapter in that book on teaching and learning. And I took 3 years to write the book, and I tried to go as deep as I could for myself to better understand teaching and learning. And everything that after reading as much as I could, I compiled all the evidence into these 4 principles. So as a coach, if I want to be a better teacher, if I use these 4 principles, I will put myself in a position to be a more effective teacher, which will help obviously become more efficient in building your athlete's confidence. So number 1, I'll just go through these quickly here, but number 1, prior knowledge can help or hinder athlete learning. So we should meet athletes where they are. we can come in with a practice plan and drills, but our first step should be kind of a needs assessment. When I meet with my team, let's do some skills tests. Let's see what we got. Let's see what their dribbling skills are like, or their catching skills are like. So let's take that first practice and just see where they are. And then I can make a better determination of where to meet them, where to start. Oh, I thought they could already do that. I guess I got to back up. Or, wow, they're actually more advanced than I thought. We could probably skip those 3 things I was going to do first. And that then relates to the second principle, is motivation. So their motivation to do the things you're asking them to do directly influences the learning process. That we can't assume that they're going to do things just because I'm the coach and I'm telling them to do it. I need to, again, meet them where they are, help them understand why we're doing things and how they relate to what they want to do. Because again, it's about them. It's not about me. Third principle, skill mastery requires athletes to learn component skills. So think of competence like a puzzle. Any skill, tactic, technique that you're trying to teach someone is like a puzzle. And anytime you think of a puzzle, when you get a puzzle, the first thing you do is you look at the cover of the box, you look at the picture, so you get a picture of what the final product should look like. You empty all the pieces on the table, and then you start organizing the pieces, right? You organize them by color or maybe by edges or corners, and you move them around the table into piles. It's the same thing with teaching skills. There's always pieces of a skill that they need to be able to do before they can do the next skill. So as a coach, have I really thought about, like, if I want my team to be better at scoring, let's say, right, in an invasion team, what are the components of being able to score? They have to be able to pass. They have to be able to read the play. They have to be in position. They have to be fit enough to get where they need to be to receive a pass. There's a lot of pieces. So it's not just scoring. What are the pieces of putting them in a position to know how to do that? And then the last one is deliberate practice and specific feedback. So all practice is not equal. Deliberate practice is practicing things you're not good at. And if you didn't show up, or you just let athletes decide, okay, we're going to practice what you want to do tonight. So what activities or drills do you want to do? Any age, any sport, any level, guarantee you they're going to pick the things they can already do, because it's much more intrinsically motivating and rewarding to practice things I'm already good at. Nobody's going to say, I want to practice that thing I can't do yet because it's really hard and I always fail. I mean, you'll get a couple of kids maybe that want it, and that's great. But so the deliberate practice is pushing them to practice the stuff that's hard for them, things they can't yet do. And that's where feedback is really important, so that you can keep them on track and motivated to keep going. So I always encourage you to think about, what are the things that they're struggling with? How can we make sure there's time in practice to focus on that, maybe early in practice? And then what type of feedback do I want to have ready to give them when they're doing that? So what kind of words do I want to use? What statements do I want to use, instead of just reacting and whatever you happen to think of in the moment? So one of the things we often do in workshops is we would then stop and we do, some of you may have been in workshops where we've done this, and ask you, so let's take a very simple skill that you've all seen or done, juggling. So what would be the first step in teaching someone how to juggle? Well, typically most people will say, tossing one ball, or tossing a ball back and forth, one hand to the other, or maybe how to grip a ball. And I say, nope, wrong. Go back to our principles. The first step in teaching something to anyone is, what do they already know? What has anyone juggled before? Have you seen someone juggle? Can you juggle? So when I think about introducing new skills, teaching new tactics or techniques with my team, the first thing I should do is get a sense of where are they on this particular skill or tactic or technique? And if I have a kid on my team who's done that before, maybe on another team or is very good at that, then I'm going to use that kid as a model, right? Peer modeling, and they can help peer coach. And so we want to be careful about just assuming they're blank slates and I got this great drill and a practice plan and everybody's going to love it. We need to be careful and think about these principles before we just dive into running a practice. Andy, what are your thoughts on this?
Completely agree. You see so many coaches, and I think we've all been guilty of this, jumping in and planning and jumping straight into the execution without that understanding of where are my athletes at, and for any given skill, some athletes will be more advanced, some will be somewhere in the middle, and some will be down here. So the answer to me is it always depends. But getting that prior knowledge of where they're at, what they can do, is hugely important.
Yeah, definitely. And these are things like you mentioned earlier with coach education or certification. Traditionally, we focus on the sport. So, rules, tactics, techniques. But where do we ever really learn how to teach these things? And that's changing. But I think the quickest way to become better as a coach is to learn how to teach. Spend some time watching good teachers, going and watching other coaches who are renowned for developing athletes. Read about teaching and learning. Listen to podcasts about teaching and learning. Watch videos about teaching and learning.
Well, Wade, we're getting some good questions coming in, so we might throw some in as we. Some will be linked to the topic. Some may be just off a little bit, but in terms of the 4 C's as we see them, we're working through them tonight. Is there one in your opinion and your research that's more important than the others? The way I've always thought is that all 4 of them integrate, and it's not something that you're going to teach a bit of competence tonight and a bit of confidence tonight. It's a framework to acknowledge that you need to be dipping in and out, and they're equally important as each other. What's your view on the 4 C's?
Yeah, it's holistic, right? It's and I see someone made a comment here about creativity as another C, well-being. Where does that fit into there? So yeah, I wouldn't want to say this is the end. This is the answer. This is everything for sure. As we learn and adapt, and coaching evolves and the profession evolves. I don't know what those 4 C's will look like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And so, but it's a step from just teaching how to serve or just teaching a corner kick or how to dribble, and understanding that there's other things that we need to be focusing on, deliberately teaching, not just assuming that these things will just magically happen. You have to teach confidence. You have to teach competence. You have to teach character. So yeah, to me, they're very much interrelated, and it's hard in reality, like to go into a practice and say that drill is just about confidence. They for sure they overlap. Yeah.
And likewise with regard to competence, Wade, to me, competence is more than a technical skill, right? It's a number of different skills. So what is the competency? What are you working on? What is it that the person, is it leadership skills, leadership competency? Is it connecting to others competency? Is it an actual execution of a skill competency? So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind as well, is that we're not just talking about sports specific X's and O's here.
Definitely. Yeah. So I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, geez, we could spend the next 20 minutes on this one slide and not be done. But so let me, in the interest of time, and I'd be happy to come back and do more sessions if that's something we want to work on. But let me at least give an overview of these 4. So if we move into confidence, and I see some good comments here about confidence, and but for me, the way I often think about confidence is, this is an example that happened when I was coaching 10-year-old girls in football or soccer. This actually happened right before a game, our first game. Our goalkeeper came up to me and said, "Coach, I'm nervous." So and we've all felt that. And no matter how much we train and prepare, we're going to have our kids are going to feel those moments, right? Even Olympic athletes feel those moments. So how do we teach them to better handle those types of moments? And one thing that I always come back to, and I think somebody else mentioned it here in the chat already, the best way to build someone's confidence is to build their competence. And when we look at the research on self-efficacy and confidence, the number one source of confidence is competence. So again, this comes back to the essence of coaching is teaching. If the best way to make you feel more resilient, more able to handle stress and pressure is to teach you skills to handle those things. And so we want to think about, again, we come back to teaching, right? How can we put them in a position where they create environments where they feel more able to handle the learning demands and the pressures and the stress. And the example I'm going to share with you here relates to, this is one of my favorite examples on creating an environment where that nurtures the willingness to try hard things and to fail and to come back. And this is a picture at the World Championships in volleyball a few years back. The U.S. women's team won the championship. It was the first championship they'd ever won, World Championship in volleyball. Always very good, but never won. And the unique thing here is the coach of the team, it was his first World Championship. And it's the person, he has his arms raised here and screaming. His name's Karch Karai, and he was voted the best volleyball player of all time. And he has won everything as a player, but he had never won anything as a coach. And so just by chance, 10 days after this picture was taken, he was sitting in a class I was giving for U.S. Olympic and Paralympic coaches. And of course, everyone wanted to know, this is a picture of the cohort of coaches from different sports who were in that class. Everyone wanted to know, well, what did you do that was all of a sudden help this team go from good to great and achieve something they've never achieved before? And he shared that really when he took the position, someone recommended he read this book. And many of you maybe have seen this book. It's not necessarily a coaching book, but it's a book I'd highly recommend, called Mindset. And it's about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And he decided, I need to create a learning environment, a team environment that aligns with a growth mindset. And you can see this is his part of his coaching philosophy here. And the yellow part I highlighted says job 1, growth mindset. And then you go down a little bit and it says mistakes, ... ugly. And what he was saying there is we can't be the best we can be if we live and train in an environment where you're afraid to make mistakes. And think about what happens in many youth sport, school sport, club sport settings. If a kid makes a mistake, they get yelled at, they get benched, they get pulled from the game. So they grow up in an environment where they learn pretty quick, don't make mistakes. So the easiest way not to make mistakes is not to try stuff I can't do well and not to take chances and not to be creative. I'll just stay in the few things I can do well and I won't get yelled at and I'll be fine. But I'm not getting better and we're not getting better. So he made the point, he said, we need to move from he felt the team was in a fixed mindset where everyone was working to really prove their ability. He said, what you want to do is create a team environment where everyone is focused on improving their ability. So it's the difference between proving and improving. And you when you start to think about this a little bit more, you can see it in certain kids and teams and clubs where it looks clean. You go watch a practice, it looks clean, it looks good. So everyone is staying very fixed. And you might watch a team that in training or practice doesn't look very good, but guess what? They're trying to get better at stuff they're not good at. So it's going to look ugly, right? And that's a growth mindset. I'm going to try it. I know that I need to learn how to do these things to get better. And so he went in a team environment where initially, if you were making mistakes, you'd get yelled at or you'd get, there'd be punishment in some form, right? But he said, we're going to change the environment here. If you're going to get punished if you're not making mistakes. you have to be making mistakes. You have, in training, you have to be willing to try stuff you haven't been able to do before. And that's going to be hard, and it's going to look ugly. And that's hard for kids in particular to grasp unless you create a nurturing environment that supports that. And this is a picture of, he's still the coach of that team. And I saw him in Tokyo at the Olympics, and they made history again. That US team won their first ever Olympic gold medal in volleyball with that same type of approach. So I'll just pause here for a moment, Andy. And I know this is probably not a new concept to many of the people on the call. This has been around for a while, but applied specifically to coaching, thinking, I'd encourage you to reflect on these types of questions. How do you respond when your athletes make mistakes? And then how do athletes respond to each other when mistakes are made? Andy, what are your thoughts on growth mindset and how that might fit with what you're seeing in New Zealand?
Yeah, I think it's a concept pretty well embraced in New Zealand generally, Wade. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that's now through the education system as well, in the the classroom. So young people are being exposed to it more and more, and it's evolving in the coaching land space as well. So I think coaches in some ways are adapting and reacting to the growth of young people, really. So when we talk about athlete-led or athlete-centered, I think one of the things we'd challenge coaches to think about a little bit more is, is what's happening in practice reflective of what's happening in the game? Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about building confidence, I often say, and I think we've all been guilty of this, is that we fall back on, the tried and tested drills, or, this is how I was coached, as opposed to thinking about, what are the key skills that these young people are going to need to perform in a game situation, and ensure that you're teaching that at practice, that they're going through that same situation as what they're going to be exposed to, through scenarios, through different examples. One player gets injured and moves off, or something, you're down 3-1 with 30 minutes to go. What does that look like? So ensuring that they're doing it in practice so that they can take it through to a game.
Definitely having some context. So small-sided games, scenarios, role playing, things like that for sure are very important. Yeah.
Hey Wade, good question raised around the 4 C's and teaching them or coaching them with athletes with learning difficulties or athletes with disabilities. As I would see it, this is just good quality coaching, regardless of the context. So the application of it applies in whatever context, whether you're high performance, whether you're a community coach, or whether you're working with, athletes with challenges. Would you see it the same way?
Oh, most definitely. So I just happen to use an example with an Olympic and a national team, but I've seen this with 10-year-olds. And actually the bulk of the research around growth mindset has been with elementary school children ages 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So these are things we're finding that are common human characteristics or principles in a sense. So if you don't mind, Danny, I'm gonna keep us moving here, and we can maybe address some additional questions when we get towards the end there, so we can at least get the C's covered.
Sounds great.
A lot of time. So the third C would be connection, and again, this is what we might refer to as interpersonal skills, better teammate. And I use an example here to illustrate this from going back to John Wooden again. Many of you may have seen his pyramid of success. And I'm not going to go through all this, but I just wanted to share this as a starting point, because he built this out over several decades, building blocks of performance greatness. So what are the building blocks of greatness as an athlete, let's say? Well, a group of us who had worked with him, played with him, or played for him, one of the psychologists who did the very first study of him in 1974, we were thinking it would be nice to have a complementary pyramid for the coach. So think of, if you had one page one sheet of paper, and on one side you have a pyramid with the building blocks of greatness for the athlete. You've turned the page over, and on the back side you have a pyramid of building blocks of greatness for a coach. So what are the components of becoming a great coach? And we published some papers related to this, but the first the foundation, the first block, first row of great coaching, when we were doing this exercise and we were consulting with Coach Whitney, who was still alive, was people skills, what we might refer to as interpersonal knowledge. So as a coach, building your interpersonal knowledge. And the first block here is love, which we define as acting in the best interest of your athlete. Again, serving your athlete, right? Not doing what's best for you, what's best for them. And sometimes that's going to be maybe discipline, and they're not going to like it or like you. But in the long run, that is what's best for their development, right? And we might refer to this bottom row as emotional intelligence. But again, this just another example reinforcing that great coaching starts with connecting with people, connecting with your athletes. So how do we build connection with our athletes? I'm going to share 3 simple activities that I do quite often and people seem to enjoy. One's a one-word activity, another one's called I Wish My Coach Knew, and the third one is a player profile card. So the one-word activity, I adapted this from a guy named John Gordon, who you may have read some of his work. He has some great books for coaches. The Energy Bus is a great book I'd highly recommend. You may have seen that one. Simple reads, easy reads. You can use them with, actually have your athletes read these books, even high school kids in particular. So he actually wrote another book called The One Word, and it's not a sport or coaching book, but it gave me this idea, could we do, this is a picture with 14 and 16-year-old girls, a basketball team. And at our first team meeting, the coach was one of my former students, and he said, I want to have, at my first meeting, I want to go through and tell them about my philosophy and our offense and our team strategy. And I said, no. The first meeting should not be about basketball. The first meeting should be about connection. Build a connection, make a connection. And remember, if they don't trust you and they don't think you care about them, basketball is not, nobody cares about basketball. They want to know first, can I trust this person? Do they care about me? So build trust. Let's do this activity. So I said, bring in a sheet of paper for every kid, markers, pencils, crayons, and ask them this question. On that sheet of paper in big block letters, write the one word that best describes you. And then color it, make it yours, right? Personalize it. And then they go around the room one at a time and they share their word and why. So it might be funny, introverted, outgoing, whatever it might be, right? But they share it. And so you do this activity, everybody's laughing, they're getting to know each other. And then went so well, he said, I got to get a picture. He took a picture and he sent it to me right after the meeting. He said, Wade, it was amazing. Look at every single kid in this picture. They've never met him before. They've never played together as a team. Every kid is smiling. They had fun. We made connection. Now we can get to basketball, right? So we start with connection. So you can, lots of different ways you could do this activity, but it's a fun one. Another one is I Wish My Coach Knew. And actually, I first became aware of this while I was in a taxi cab in New Zealand, going from one workshop to another. And someone shared this link with me and said, there's this neat article in the New York Times about this little strategy that teachers are using with their elementary school kids. And it's having this tremendous impact on behavior and attention and focus and discipline. And it's just, you give this little card, an index card, or you can do it any way you want digitally, and you have a prompt on there. You give it to each kid periodically and you say, at the top, this would say, I wish my coach knew, right? This is an example here. I wish my teacher knew. And you can see this was an 8 or 10-year-old kid who wrote this. I wish my teacher knew that my dad works 2 jobs and I don't see him much. And so I do this. I would not do this the first time you get together with a team, because you don't have any trust yet. They don't know who you are, or why would I share something personal with you yet? So this could be 2-3 weeks, maybe second week into a season with athletes, with your team. You say, okay, we're going to try something before you leave tonight. Just fill this out. One thing I wish my coach knew about me. You go home, you read them, and you'll be amazed at the stuff that the kids share with you, and it will totally open your eyes to who they are as people and what they're dealing with at home and friends and family, which of course directly impacts how they're going to behave at practice and their motivation to do certain things at practice and with the team. So I use this one a lot. And then the third one is the player profile cards. And I got this one again from Coach Wooden. A lot of the things I use can be traced back to him. And he used to keep little index cards on 40 years of coaching on every player he coached. And he would write things like, obviously demographic information, name, age, height, whatnot. But he would also write things like responds best when, doesn't respond well when, reminds me of. And so he ended up having this little profile on every player he coached. And then you get into another season and you can refer back to these cards for other players. So I coach next year and I'm struggling to make a connection with Andy. And I think, you know what? Andy reminds me of Mark. 3 years ago, I had a kid just like Andy. I'm going to see what I wrote about Mark, pull out the card and say, Mark responded really well when I did this. Maybe if I did something like this with Andy, it might also help build a connection. So I did something similar with the hockey teams, ice hockey teams that I coached, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, and they could do it with their parent. 1 page, early, first week of the season maybe, and just some questions. This is the front half of the page. The bottom half of the page I have here on, well, you can see this last question. One thing we should know about your player that will help us better coach you, right? Or one thing we should know about, we'll coach them. The bottom half of the first page, you see the 4 C's. So I'm having them rate the 4 C's, the parent or the player or together. And honestly, I don't care what the numbers are. I'm not doing data analysis on this. It's just, again, creating a language, right? A shared language with the players and the parents about the things that matter or should matter to us. And then also I want to know, what do you want to get better at? Because that directly relates to one of the principles of teaching and learning, right? If they're going to invest more, if I'm helping them get better at the things they want to get better at, and how will I know that unless I ask them what they want to get better at?
Hey, Wade, I'll just quickly jump in there.
Yeah.
Everyone on the call, couple of things. Wade has kindly shared that file with us. It's if you go down your tabs to the file tab, the document will be sitting in there. So thank you, Wade. Please feel free to adapt that for your teams. And I'll also just make a quick announcement. We always tend to do this, Wade. We've got so much information we want to share. We go over time. So for those that are conscious of time, we're just about to hit 7 o'clock. So if you need to move on, please do so. This is fully recorded and you'll get the recording of it. Wade, we're about to hit my favorite C. So we can't stop the webinar right now. So let's carry on for 10 minutes and finish the final wrap up.
Perfect. And I apologize for going over. No matter how much I try and cut my sessions, whenever I get live with them, I always run out of time. I don't know if I'll ever figure that out. It's just passionate about these things, and it's fun to talk about them with other people like yourself. Okay, so we'll do our best here to provide a quick snapshot on the 4th C, and then we'll finish up. But this is a prompt I'd encourage you to reflect on as a coach too, as you go into your seasons. How do I build connection? Which another way to think about that is applying interpersonal knowledge while acting in the best interest of my athletes, showing that I care about them, right? All right, so the 4th and final C that we'll look at tonight is character. And the way I often present character and think about character now is, really kind of specific to team culture. How do we build better team character? So it's good individual character, great, but team character or club character even, right? And this is, what Sport New Zealand is doing. My understanding with Balance is Better, we're trying to build character across our entire country and our sport landscape, right? So when I think about character, I often go to values and standards. And a simple way to think about that is, what asking this kind of question to your athletes right at the beginning of the season, what matters to us and how are we going to act? We decide. So we decide what our character is going to look like and how we're going to hold each other accountable. I just put up an example here. I did some work with badminton a while back. They had these 3 values. I am clean, I am honest, I am badminton. And that's not unusual. Most clubs, teams, sports would have some kind of values or standards that they list. Could be on a t-shirt or on a wall or on a pamphlet, but you have to live it. This is what I'm going to show you. This is a separator, but it takes a little bit of effort and a little bit of time. So you have to live your values. You can't just identify or post. You have to live your values. And the way you live your values are through the standards, the everyday standards, the everyday behaviors, the way you act and how your team acts and how you hold each other accountable. And I share this example here, and then I'll show you a strategy that I've used. This is an example from the U.S. men's basketball team a few years ago, and this is a great book. Whether you like basketball or not, it's not really a basketball book. It's a book written by the head coach, Mike Krzyzewski, and it's a book of moments. So he walks through when I took over the team, what did I do the first meeting, and then our first practice, our first travel. And one of the very first things he did with the team, and these are world-class athletes, but do this with 10-year-olds too, is identify how are we going to act around here? What's it going to look like? And so what are our values? And if you're coming into an existing situation, maybe your club already has values and things like that, great. But what are they going to look like for us? How we get to define those things. So he, with his team, on the one column here where it says core values, the team identified these are our values. This is what our values are going to be for this mission. But the key now is to define what those values look like in behaviors. So they, gave some examples here. What does communication look like? Well, we look each other in the eye when we talk to each other. So this is a really good exercise I find you could do with any level of team, and probably even more important to do with young kids. So imagine if you go in with 8-year-olds and say, okay, our core values are respect, humility, and trust. What does humility mean to an 8-year-old? They don't know what that means. Most of my college students wouldn't be able to tell you what. Well, we all have different ideas. We have a different picture in our head. Oh yeah, I got it, coach. I got it. No, we're going to talk about it. We're going to identify what does that look like for our team. And so this is a worksheet that I use. You could easily reproduce this, that I have in my book, but I do it in workshops quite often. And this would be something good to do right away in the preseason, early with your team in a team meeting. And it could be 3 values. There's no magic number. It could be 3, it could be 8, could be 13, whatever. But you have to do that second part of the exercise here where you identify the behavior. What does that look like? So when you do this, that's an example of trust. When you don't do this, that's an example of not living our values. And some simple examples here to reinforce that, how just the moments that you have with your team, all these little moments that we go through on a daily basis are opportunities to teach, reinforce, and recognize our values. So how you enter a locker room, how you walk onto a pitch, how you start a practice, how you end a practice, how you start a team meeting, all these little moments, right? And some examples that I have here, a football team, this picture in the bottom, they have painted "I'm in" across the top of the doors that lead out to the practice field. And every player and staff member has to touch it and tap in when they go out through those doors. It's just a simple reinforcement of, hey, when you walk through these doors, you're all in. You're in with us. A hockey team, when I was talking to a pro hockey player one time, and they were very successful. And he said, yeah, one of the things we did is we had a routine. When you walked into the locker room, the first thing you had to do was go and say hi to everyone in the locker room. And think of what happens at most practices, my experience, even at any level, especially coaching kids, right? They walk into the locker room, they go sit beside their best friend or someone they really like, and they just talk to each other. No. Go say hi, shake hands, and whatever you have in your team, every single person in that room. That's how we act around here, right? That's one of our values. And then the last thing I'll just share here, I've really come to learn that, and I wrote a commentary about this, about how you spread your culture and character like a virus. And this was years before COVID. But now we all know way too much about viruses and how they spread. But it really struck me the more time I spent around teams all over the world, that the better teams that have better character and perform better, those environments are contagious environments. And what I mean by that is there's people in that environment who are strong carriers of the character virus, our value virus, and they infect everyone else with it. Just like a virus spreads, you have to have strong carriers of the virus. That could be your captains, alumni, parents, coaches, seniors, players, whoever. And I'll just share a quick example. Like I was doing a tour in Australia one time, and sometimes I do 3 different clubs in the same day, and I did about 25 different teams. And so I got to see very quickly back to back how all these different clubs operate. And some clubs, you walk in, and right away, as soon as you walk into the facility, every single person you pass, from administrative assistant to all-time Hall of Fame player to coach, goes out of their way to walk up and say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. Nice to meet you. What's your name? Hey, welcome to the club today." Other clubs, you could walk past, through the whole building. Nobody even makes eye contact or says hi or gives you the time of day. Those are little things that make a difference. So we want to be with our character. The best way, character is caught more than it's taught. And the best way to catch it is to be infectious and create infectious environments and be contagious. And this picture, to me, summarizes that. This is a Hall of Fame, one of the greatest ice hockey players of all time. This is a couple of years ago, someone sent me this picture after a workshop, says, "This is exactly what you're talking about." Hall of Famer, 10 championships. And he was a coach with this team, and he's outside the locker room. No one's around. I was in the hallway loading sticks into a bag. That's not his job. He doesn't need to be doing that. And in fact, many people say, why is he doing that? Because he's being contagious. He's trying to infect the team with their values, humility, sweep the sheds, pick up the trash, do the little things. And I can't just tell you to do it. I got to do it. Right. All right, so I'll leave it there, Andy, with another question for people to reflect on. If I visited your team, if I came out and watched a practice or came out to an event, I should see your values in action. I should be, after spending an hour or two with you, I should be able to tell you, hey, I think your values are, and list them. I should be able to see that through your behaviors.
Great, Wade. Thanks so much. A lot of information in there to unpack. I think the only answer is we're going to have to get you back on at some stage, maybe in the new year to do session 2. Look, I've been scribbling here and just tried to summarize in four lines what I heard tonight, and that I hope people will take away from the session. Firstly, know your athletes holistically. Secondly, know yourself. Third, know your sport and how to teach it. And the last is know your targets, and you can do that by applying the 4 C's framework. So great information, Wade. You present it so elegantly as well. So really, it's been a real pleasure having you on the session. Everyone will obviously get a recording of this, and we'll also put some follow-up resources to some of the great questions from tonight as well. So once again, from New Zealand, Wade, thank you so much. We'll draw the webinar to a conclusion right now, and I'll just close with the Sport New Zealand karakia. Tu tawa mai runga, tu tawa mai araro, tu tawa mai awato, tu tawa mai waho, kia tau ai ti Māori tū, kia tau ai ti Māori ora, tūturu whakamaua kia tina, haumie, huie, taiki e.